Bastarino. Excuse me 1 minute, George. We're readjusting. Thank you, George, very much for being here. I invited George to be here tonight, asked if he had a few minutes to spend with us because I have been getting a lot of questions from residents of the town with regard to the county's affordable housing settlement that was entered into by the prior county executive.
Right.
And those questions, particularly revolve around the town of Somers. Apparently, there's a lot of rumor and innuendo and various in various forms flying around the town with regard to the town of Somers' involvement in that settlement agreement. And so, George, if you could just tell us, who made that decision? Was the town of Somers part of that decision?
Right.
Did we get to vote on it? Did we have any input into it?
Are we a target? I think that's the question I keep getting.
Okay, well, I'll answer, let's see. I mean, they're all easy questions. They're all no is the answer. Somers is a target. No municipality in the county is a target. We are trying to work cooperatively with our municipalities to meet the requirements of this stipulation and settlement. And for purposes of full disclosure, prior to becoming chief of staff, I was a member of that legislature. I was one of I'm trying to remember the exact number. I think there were 7 of us that voted against that settlement, including some members of both parties. Thought it was a very bad settlement, and it was crafted by a prior administration. However, once that was adopted back in September, it's almost akin to if the Senate 10 years ago passed a treaty. Just because a new president comes in, he can't ignore something that's quite frankly becomes the law of the land, and you have to deal with what you've got. In terms of Somers being part of why the settlement was even there, there's no foundation for that at all. It's interesting case. The lawyers will appreciate this. The settlement actually has nothing to do about discrimination, has nothing to do about housing. The lawsuit was a federal lawsuit brought under something called the Federal False Claims Act. It is a law that was established back in the 1860s during the Civil War. And the original purpose that Congress had for the act was the uniforms that were being sold to Union soldiers were falling apart. And so basically what the federal government and the Congress did back then is they said, we're going to put a bounty on people who rip off the federal government. So if you're a manufacturer or you're getting a grant from the federal government, or you're doing something with the federal government, a third party, doesn't have to be anybody offended, just a taxpayer, can bring an action against the person that either sold the good to the federal government or took some kind of money from the federal government and say, you took it under false pretenses, and as a taxpayer, I want that money back, and in fact, you're going to have to pay it back 3 times over. 1/3 goes back to the federal government to make them whole, and 2/3 goes to me for being the good citizen or the bounty hunter. So that whole litigation was promulgated on what's called the Federal False Claims Act. And what they alleged is that over the prior 7 or 8 years, as the county of Westchester took what's called community development block grants from Washington, that we failed, we certified every year we got those funds by signature of the then county executive, that we were doing all we could, not necessarily even with that money, but just all we could to achieve fair and affordable housing in Westchester County. And what the case was about was going in and saying, you signed this document, you took this money under false pretenses because you never really did show that you did something to promote fair and affordable housing. Quite frankly, I think the reason it wasn't done is because we never thought in this county, and I don't think it's true, that people were barred from purchasing homes based on race, color, or creed. The only thing that bars somebody in Westchester County from buying a home is having enough money. Many of us on the legislature, those of us who voted against it, thought this was a very frivolous action. In fact, the prior administration, if you recall the newspaper articles, he called it a garbage lawsuit. Garbage lawsuit. Unfortunately, the case, and again, we weren't losing this case. The lawyers will know there's something called declaratory judgment, where you go in and you just say, you know what, this case is so far-fetched, there's no point in even going forward. There's nothing here to litigate. Well, the judge denied that by both sides. So those of us, again, who were not in favor of the settlement, and I might add that the current county executive was not in favor of this settlement when he was running as a candidate, felt that there's no reason to settle. We could continue with the trial, or if we were going to settle, we could have got a settlement that was much fairer to the taxpayers of Westchester County. So that's the genesis of the lawsuit. It certainly had nothing to do with the town of Somers at all. In fact, when you read through the transcripts that led up to the stipulation in all the pretrial work, to me, I'm an attorney, but I'm not expert in federal law, but when I read it, it basically looks like what the county failed to do was check off a little box and write a little paragraph on a report that we sent in every year. It almost appears as though if somebody in our bureaucracy had simply said, Westchester is doing the following things to get fair and affordable housing. We have built this affordable housing, we make it known to the public that it's available, and we have done nothing that would stop somebody from buying it based on their race, color, or creed. Unfortunately, that was never put in those reports, and that's what got us to where we are. In terms of the targets, where some people may be misdirecting folks, is there are what are called, there are communities that the way the settlement was crafted did become a racial issue. Because the way it is crafted, it is saying that they took census blocks throughout the county. And if your community or your town has less than a certain percentage of Hispanic population and less than a certain percentage of African American population, those are areas where the 750 fair and affordable houses that the county's under this stipulation settlement to build over the next 7 years, those are the communities that have to build them first. Not necessarily the only ones, but first we have to build a certain number of them in those particular communities. Now, Somers is one of 31 communities that way. So it's not just Somers, it's 31 other communities that are there. Cities like Peekskill, which I've represented, already have a population above those thresholds, so there is no requirement that they build any of this fair and affordable housing.
George,
yeah.
One of the questions I asked our two county legislators, they still are, and I believe they both voted yes on it.
They did both vote yes.
Was these funds that are causing everything, Somers got almost none of them, from what I understand.
That's correct.
I was never given a number, and I think that's what some people are saying is that the funds that are causing the lawsuit, Somers didn't benefit at all, and yet there are people, as we're saying, that are out there saying that Somers is the target.
Well, remember, Somers did not certify those documents.
Exactly.
The county executive did. So no one ever asked Somers, are you doing it? And there was no obligation to. Are you doing your fair and affordable share of housing? There's no requirement for the local municipalities, because the way we did community development block grants, it all got funneled through the county, and the county divvied up the money as it saw fit. You bring up a great point, Tom, because the town of Mount Pleasant hasn't accepted any CBDG money over the years. And communities like Yonkers, White Plains, New Rochelle, they got the bulk of this money. And interestingly enough, while they don't have to comply with the housing, their taxpayers are paying for the money that has to go to build this housing that we were obligated to set aside. So that was probably reason number 39 out of about 60 that I voted against it. I thought it was unfair to a lot of different communities. So anyway, I don't know if anybody else has any other questions. I'll tell you one thing. If you remember about a year ago when the stimulus money was out there and some of the governors were saying they didn't necessarily want this because of the strings attached, this is a perfect example of that, where the county took this money in good faith, did things. By the way, every year HUD accepted our report and signed off on it and said it's okay. Yet, because a third party came in and said, well, we don't think it was okay, and HUD just took a step back and said, well, which is another area I think that we could have litigated had we gone to litigation. I mean, there's sort of that doctrine of unclean hands. If you're leading me along for 10 years saying, it's okay, it's okay, it's okay, and then somebody else stands up suddenly and says, you can't let them do that. Oh, you're right. I'm sorry. We're going to go back 10 years now, and you're going to have to make up for something that you didn't even know was wrong.
Right, but Somers, just because we may have some excess sewer capacity in a section of town or whatever, is not being targeted by the county.
Absolutely not.
Okay.
We have not.
Because that's what's been traveling around.
Absolutely.
And that's
no
the
community has a target on it. No community has a number on it.
It doesn't make any difference if you have a sewer district or you don't.
No. Listen, first
George,
of all,
do most of those 31 municipalities have sewers in them?
Well, I don't know. Maybe here's the answer. I don't know. The 31 communities include communities like Eastchester and Tuckahoe, where I guess they do have sewers. Bronxville, they have sewers. Scarsdale has sewers.